Welcome everybody. It is great to see so many people. Right now we have about 40 people in the room. We expect another 27 or so registered, so that's really good. We have a strong representation from ASEAN countries, approximately 2/3 of the people, so we're really happy to see make this international connection. We have people in almost all time zones. So that's really great. The possibilities of this technology, we're making the most of them right here. So I just want to welcome everybody, and I'm Bruce McConnell with the EastWest Institute, a U.S. do tank. We're not a think tank, although we do think. And we are here, joined here with some partners, excellent partners, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, and the Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or as I prefer to say, RSIS. So it's a collaboration here, East and West, and North and South. I wanted to give you some housekeeping notes before we start. So we'll put up this slide of the Chatham House rule, and you are probably all familiar with this. We are recording the entire meeting, but the discussion portion will be held under the Chatham House rule, which you see there. So basically, it's like, you know, you can say what happened at the meeting, but try not to tweet who said what. Okay, thank you. Anyway, we'll make the recording of the speakers' presentations public on our website and on the RSIS website afterwards, but we will not make public the discussion. So the idea is the discussion is open. As I said, please mute your audio when you're not speaking. And if you have a comment or question, please use the raise hand function during the discussion. I'll come back to this later. Or you can write things in the chat too. Okay, let's go over the agenda real quick. So after I get done here, we'll go into some presentations, 5 to 7 minute presentations from our international and local speakers, starting off with David Koh, the Chief Executive of the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, followed right after that by Carmen Gonzalez, Head International Cyber Policy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, Elena Nour, Visiting Fellow, Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia, and Chris Painter, President, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, or GFCE Foundation. I'll introduce them better in a few minutes. We'll go into a discussion after the speakers are finished, and you can raise your hand and raise questions during the chat. We'll try to get it. It's not just a Q&A. If you have opinions, they're welcome. So please, it's supposed to be a roundtable discussion. At the end, we will have great concluding remarks by our partner, Shashi Jayakumar, who is from RSIS, which will take a little bit broader perspective of the overall thing, context we're in. So you are in the first meeting of a series of regional cyber dialogues that EWI, that's my EastWest Institute, is conducting with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs to address regional cyber challenges and capacity building needs. So this is the first one of these meetings. And originally, of course, as you might imagine, it was going to be in person. We can't do that right now. We're in a lot of uncertainty all around the world. And so we're keeping the conversation going with these virtual roundtables, and we hope to be in Singapore in 2021 for a physical version of this meeting at that point. I want to invite, in particular, Carmen Gonzalez to say a few words about this project, which, as I said, is a series of 10 meetings over a 2-year period. Carmen?
Thank you very much, Bruce. And on behalf of Timo Koster, our ambassador for cyber and security, who much to his regret cannot join us today, it's a great pleasure to greet all of you. In the coming month, EWI is going to organize, as Bruce has just said, 10 regional meetings around the world, bringing together leading experts and decision makers from governments, private sector, academia, and civil society. And the reason why we're so keen in sponsoring and in partnering with EWI is because We believe that the international cyber policy discussions are in need of a much broader discussion and broader engagement than we have at the moment. We are convinced that in order to build a truly global cyber ecosystem that serves all, we must dare to listen to new voices and take on board concrete solutions and concerns from all around the world. And well, let's phrase it this way, and in a frank manner. I think we all tend to speak a lot to those partners that we know well. And that makes for very comfortable, like-minded exchanges. However, that will not suffice, of course, if we want to achieve a free, open, and safe cyberspace for everybody, regardless of where we were born or bred. And that's, I think, an imperative to open our minds and our hearts and to be a bit more, active in engaging with others. So that's, and this project, I think, gives us a great opportunity to do so. Our aim is to create a setting where we can try and move away from the current framework based on ideological debate between opposing sides. And this project provides a space for multi-stakeholder conversations parallel to the proceedings in the UN, but outside this existing political frame that so often stifles direct conversation. And it is our strong intent that these discussions be concrete and specific, and thus providing also input in these existing fora and discussions ongoing there. We definitely are very, very enthusiastic and happy that although we had to accommodate, of course, to the worldwide COVID crisis, we are able to start our discussions today, and we're very happy that we are starting them with countries in Southeast Asia. That's definitely a very good place to start. The exchange of views and best practices that we are embarking in hopefully helps us also to build capacity worldwide and foster national cybersecurity strategies that will recognize regional and international dimensions and reflect those common understandings and approaches to challenges at hand, and eventually, of course, contribute to this much desired free, open, and safe cyberspace for all. But before I pass on the mic again to the chair, I would like to take the opportunity, and it's a privilege, to introduce to you. I cannot see if she is in the audience, but I'm confident that she is, our future cyber envoy, Natalie Yarsma. Natalie, our former ambassador until very recently to Cyprus. She has not taken over the baton from Timor yet, but she is very happy, and we are very happy to have her here, to have the opportunity to connect to today's exchanges in preparation to her tenure.
Welcome, Natalie. Do you want to say anything? It's great to meet you virtually, and we look forward to working together.
Thank you very much. Let me say something so at least people will see me because of the technicalities. As Carmen said, I really look forward to working with you. I just moved from Cyprus, as in yesterday. So today the movers are coming, so I'm really in listening mode, but I'm very interested. Thank you. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Great. Welcome, and thank you, Carmen, for those remarks. All right, it is time for us to begin our presentations. And let's go back to the general gallery view, please. And that'll be great. Meanwhile, let me start by introducing our first speaker, David Koh from the Cyberspace Administration, Singapore Cybersecurity Agency. He will start out and give us a larger context of the regional activities, and the floor is yours. David, thank you.
Thank you, Bruce, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody, all the esteemed participants. Thank you very much. I am honored to be invited by the EastWest Institute, EWI, and the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, RSIS, to speak on this very important topic against the backdrop of COVID-19. The global pandemic has shown how important digital capabilities are to all nations in ensuring that essential services, effective governance, and communications can continue in a highly disrupted environment. Cybersecurity is a key enabler of this. It underpins our citizens and businesses' trust and confidence in the digital domain. Let me begin with the new normal that we now live in due to COVID-19. Well, first of all, the fact that we're having this meeting in this format is, I think, the clearest example of this new normal that all of us have had to adapt to. COVID-19 has fundamentally changed the way that we work and live. Many countries, including Singapore, have imposed lockdown strategies to curb the spread of COVID-19, resulting in businesses being affected by stop work orders, supply chain disruptions, and workforce having to adapt to working remotely, and society being forced to change our lifestyles literally overnight. Yet the pandemic has also accelerated the pace of digitalization, where we see businesses intensifying their adoption of digital tools for sustainability and individuals amplifying their digital activities for continuity and sanity. At the regional level, ASEAN member states have switched to video teleconferencing to continue a myriad of discussions ranging from health protection to economic and security issues. While technological advancements may be deemed a savior in this regard, the heavier reliance on the internet has also introduces new vulnerabilities, and it expands the attack surface, making a robust cybersecurity environment all the more crucial for this sustaining the digital trust. In fact, we have observed a marked increase in related malicious cyber activities during this period. There are two likely reasons for this. First, many businesses have rushed to ensure connectivity, whether it was through the adoption of new technology systems or virtually to connect their remote workers without putting sufficient consideration to closing the security and control gaps. Second, threat actors have opportunistically pivoted their tactics to leverage on COVID-19 developments in order to make their campaigns more effective. These attacks range from capitalizing on general pandemic-related interests, such as fake COVID-19 news, to more targeted attempts, such as hacking into healthcare facilities to steal patients' data in exchange for ransom, or the hacking of biotech companies to steal virus or vaccine data. So how do we live? How we live, work, and play in the digital domain today is a confluence of the geopolitical, the economic, and technological trends. Emerging technologies have disrupted traditional businesses, job, and lifestyle models, but they can also provide some solutions to better secure the cyberspace landscape. For instance, the protection of core digital infrastructure as we move towards a hyper-connected landscape with the convergence of the Internet of Things, big data, analytics, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, AI. We must recognize that as much as we try to secure our infrastructure, sophisticated threat actors will still find creative ways to breach our systems and networks. We want to be able to detect malicious cyber activities early through active monitoring of threats and take swift action to address them and minimize the impact on users. We can leverage on IoT devices to collect data from various sources and collate the information in the cloud for big data analytics. Or we can train and improve AI algorithms for automated threat detection and analysis. AI engines can swiftly go through huge troves of structured and unstructured cyber information, make sense and correlate these information and conduct investigations more efficiently and effectively. While quantum computing and 5G technologies, cybersecurity threat detection and prevention can be boosted further in terms of speed. That said, these can also be a double-edged sword. Threat actors can use the same capabilities to outsmart cybersecurity systems, or exploit the new vulnerabilities generated by emerging technology. Hence, risk mitigation controls such as quantum information assurance, crypto-agile system architecture for digital systems and assets will be necessary to address sophisticated attacks. In Singapore, we also intend to implement the cybersecurity labeling scheme to help consumers make informed choices about the security features of IoT devices. Over time, we hope this will incentivize developers to develop products with recognized and improved security features. Additionally, Singapore has developed a voluntary contact tracing app, Trace Together, which uses Bluetooth technology to exchange connections between nearby devices that have the same app, rather than trying to record geolocation or randomize user IDs that are refreshed regularly. To address the issue of privacy and to prevent unauthorized disclosure of information, we have made the source code available to enable other countries to build similar solutions locally, while also enabling interoperability across jurisdictions, because one day we hope that we will be able to travel again. This is our contribution to the global community to cohesively combat cyber adjacencies brought upon by this pandemic. However, technology is only one part of the solution. As cyber threats become increasingly sophisticated with the advent of new technologies, there is a need to sustain a rules-based international order to govern behavior in cyberspace and advance the security and trust that is essential to international cooperation and the effective functioning of the digital economy. At the UN level, both the UN Group of Governmental Experts, the GGE, and the Open-Ended Working Group, the OEWG, continue to have substantive discussions on these issues. Singapore actively participates in both of them. It is important that such discussions continue to be hosted at the United Nations, where all countries, big and small, have a voice. ASEAN has also been making positive steps on this front. Just last year, ASEAN ministers and senior officials meeting agreed at the 4th ASEAN Ministerial Conference on Cybersecurity to set up a working group to develop a roadmap for the implementation of the 11 norms contained in the 2015 UN GGE Consensus Report. At the same time, given the diverse cyber capabilities across countries, there is an urgent need for coordinated cybersecurity capacity building initiatives at both the policy development and the technical levels to ensure that countries are adequately competent to implement the rules and norms designed to advance peace and security in an increasingly sophisticated and hyper-connected cyberspace. There is a degree of self-interest in doing this. Cybersecurity threats do not respect borders, and we are only as strong as the weakest link. The Global Forum for Cybersecurity Expertise, GFCE, has been doing great work on coordinating capacity building at the international level. At the regional level, the ASEAN-Singapore Cybersecurity Center for Excellence, ASCCE, and the ASEAN-Japan Cyber Capacity Building Center, AJCCBC, are also actively delivering capacity building initiatives in our region. I'm happy to note that my fellow speakers will be covering these topics in greater detail during their presentations. Such discourse will help us to better understand and navigate the challenges in the digital future. Moving forward, it is important not just to build defenses for the cyber threats of today, but also to identify opportunities in the emerging technologies and develop the infrastructure, capabilities, and relationships to help us, enable us to tackle the cyber challenges of tomorrow. On this note, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was really a great call to partnership and the importance of having multiple voices in the conversation, since we're all so dependent on this infrastructure and it operating securely and safely. So thank you very much for that. It's my pleasure now to reintroduce Carmen Gonzalez, who will talk to us about, David mentioned norms and the UN process, and I think Carmen's going to talk about that a little bit more. Carmen?
Thank you very much, Bruce. And David, thank you very much for kicking off our today's discussions in such a formidable way, highlighting both the challenges, but also the possibilities that new technologies provide us, and what we have to work with well together. Also highlighting the importance of strengthening our normative framework worldwide. And I also thank you for your leading role in that field. Because indeed 4 years of engaging international cybersecurity have made me more than aware of the increasing challenges of cyber insecurity. And of course, I'm not the only one. Not only within governments, but also among other stakeholders like private sector, NGOs, the public, academia and technical community. There's a sense of urgency, growing sense of urgency to address these threats and work towards a rules-based cybersecurity environment. The Netherlands has been an active player in cyber diplomacy. We're strongly committed to the UN processes at hand, the UNGGE and the open-ended working group debates for that matter. We have put strong emphasis on capacity building, both technical, but also, for example, in the field of international law. And we're a founding member, for that matter, of the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise that Chris is representing here today. And we've been a strong advocate for accountability and an attribution of irresponsible behavior in cyberspace, which has inter alia resulted in putting in place in the European Union a cyber sanctions regime. We've also launched a network, by the way, of cyber diplomats throughout our embassy network to deepen our diplomatic engagement on this issue globally. The threats in cyberspace are, as David already very eloquently said, evolving at a quick pace. The latest Dutch annual cyber threat assessment noted that the increasing digital dependencies result in potential vast disruptions of society if cyber attacks occur. Actions in cyberspace force us to think deeply about our core values as nations and humans. And in the Netherlands, for example, that also translates in public debate about these issues. For example, the development of a track and trace app to help us cope with COVID-19 and its response to it has led to a lively debate in which the rights to privacy are pitted against collective rights like safety, health, etc. Such discussions are sometimes complex, but they are definitely also necessary. I hope that those discussions are also translated to the international norms debate. More and more stakeholders are acknowledging that mitigating these threats that we're facing is not only a matter of technical solutions, but also a policy and normative challenge. With regard to the last part, the Netherlands has been engaging, as said, in a number of multilateral and multi-stakeholder discussions to find international solutions for these global challenges. Fortunately, a lot of work on norms and the international legal order has already been done. For example, in the previous groups of governmental experts at UN level. And important steps were taken there, such as acknowledging the applicability of international law in cyberspace, as well as the urgency of building cybersecurity capacity around the globe. Last year in the UN in New York, an important new step was taken by, by the way, this was already nearly 2 years ago, by launching both a new expert discussion, a GGE and an open-ended working group. In our view, the new expert level group, the GGE, provides UN with a new opportunity to further develop and deepen the normative framework, whereas the open-ended working group could focus on effective implementation and consolidation of existing UN agreements. For example, explaining further what these UN agreements mean for states on a national level, what are best practices for implementation, and where do we need to build more capacity, and how can we help each other building that capacity. In both the GGE as well as the open-ended working group, the Netherlands has promoted a number of normative ideas based on the belief that we can build a norms-based cyberspace as well as be adaptive to evolving threats and challenges. And we're not alone in this. To support this endeavor, we've drawn from valuable recommendations made during multi-stakeholder consultations in the UN in 2019 in December, for example, but also on the important work done by other multi-stakeholder fora. First and foremost, the Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, and several members of that commission are with us today. The Commission issued a, I think, commendable report last year that is a must read for everybody who is engaged and encouraged to work towards a stable, open, free, and secure cyberspace. But also, of course, the Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace comes to mind. In the open-ended working group, we have proposed, we have come up with a proposal to protect infrastructure essential to the general availability or integrity of the public core of the internet. And that is part and parcel to our mind, in our thinking, to the existing norms that are already there in the UN space about protecting and not attacking critical infrastructure. And why have we proposed this, the protection? Why have we come up with a proposal to protect the public core of the internet? First of all, because we consider the threat to the core of the internet as very real. Over the years, the threat against the availability of the internet has proven real and credible. Examples like the notorious Mirai botnet attack in 2016 abound, of course. In our vision, the internet as we know it has been a great contributor to economic and societal development, and we need to protect its unique character. And the public core of the internet is essential to protect this and to enhance this network of networks. The public core is the glue holding together and ensuring the interoperability of the internet. And when we talk about the public core, we're talking about the basic protocols that govern the internet. And we're talking about routing and other main features that are not physical mainly, but that are of non-physical character, but nonetheless incredibly important. The kind of guidance that could help states and thus the international community in ensuring that no malicious activities are conducted against the general availability and the integrity of the internet is what we hope that comes forth of our proposal to provide normative protection to the core. But on a similar footing, we've also sought to address the threat that we are experiencing against electoral processes, a cyber threat against electoral processes. And over the past years, this threat has become more and more disruptive and real. Actors can undermine electoral processes through malicious cyber activities. I think I do not need to mention the several, the very well-known examples and incidents that have happened across the globe. As for this reason, that, and because of the far-reaching consequences of interference and disruption, that we feel that the open-ended working group should urgently address this threat. And therefore we have come up with a proposal to protect the electoral infrastructure. And we feel that that is also part and parcel of the framework that's already in place to protect critical infrastructure as such. And also, again, we hope that this adopting language on protecting electoral infrastructure will promote a more stable and secure cyberspace and will definitely be followed and adhered to by everybody across the globe. Of course, that might not be something we have tomorrow, but at least we should strive for it. David already mentioned that the COVID-19 crisis has brought to the fore more than ever the importance of digitalization, but also the vulnerabilities that we are that we are experiencing, and that have to and the threats we have to cope with. That's also why, and we were definitely also shocked, I think everybody around the globe, to see that the COVID-19 crisis as such was exploited by some to engage in cyber and malicious cyber activities and attack the World Health Organization or both research institutions, medical research institutions, and hospitals for that matter. And that's why in the open-ended working group, we have also with others highlighted the importance to address the threats to the healthcare sector and to explicitly name and express our concerns and express our wish to protect the healthcare sector and to consider it also part and parcel of our critical infrastructure. Notwithstanding the fact that countries are, of course, free to denominate and to define what's not or what is in their critical infrastructure, we do, I think, find it a very important discussion and we would like to see and witness a discussion around the world, and also developments that definitely bring healthcare sector and other vital services that are important for our citizens and our societies in that realm. Well, to conclude, these developments in the threat landscape, and on the other hand, the discussion, the fruitful, I think, new ideas that are on the table for normative remedies are an invitation to continue and to redouble our efforts to build a set of cyber norms that are respected and abided by the vast majority of state and non-state actors around the globe. And the discussion at international level has its challenges, but I'm pretty sure, and I feel that growing on a daily basis, that the awareness that something needs to be done is there. So hard time to grasp the nettle and to get on with it. Thank you, and looking forward for the rest of the discussions today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carmen, for that great summary of the norms and the processes at the United Nations. In particular, the emphasis on the public core. I mean, this is just basically the infrastructure that we all depend on everywhere in the world. And we surely must be able to agree to not attack that and allow ourselves to continue to coexist. So that's such an important piece of this, and we need as much support for that as possible. I want to next call on Elena Nour, visiting fellow at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies in Malaysia, who's coming to us at this moment from Honolulu. And welcome, Elena, to talk about cyber capacity building.
Thank you, Bruce. And good evening from the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Thank you for this opportunity. Let me jump straight to it and offer 3 reflections on the relevance of the UN cyber norms processes to ASEAN cyber capacity building priorities. First, the UN cyber norms processes and the open-ended working group, the OEWG in particular, have been extremely valuable in raising awareness, broadening perspectives, and bringing representational diversity, not only by way of participation, but also through the range of issues highlighted. The OEWG has provided a platform for many more voices to be heard and exchanges to be had among groups of stakeholders that would not otherwise be in the same room. This was demonstrated most clearly during the informal consultation session in New York in December 2019. Although the widely differing narratives from cybercrime to rights and freedoms sometimes seem to muddy the threat landscape, the tabling of these varied interests nevertheless provided useful insight into cross-sectoral perspectives that may put ASEAN member states on notice for the near future. For ASEAN countries that have not yet had the opportunity to field experts in the UNGGE, the OEWG has offered a chance for these states to register their interest and positions on important but still nascent issues such as international law and capacity building. And this can be seen through the country comments on the initial pre-draft of the OEWG report, done individually or through groupings such as the non-aligned movement, of which I believe all ASEAN countries are members of. Further, the alignment of agendas as well as cooperation and overlap between the OEWG and the GGE has facilitated a smoother flow and perhaps even harmonization of ideas between both processes. Second, there is a but. For ASEAN member states to take full advantage of these UN processes, they must know what they want. If capacity building is to be demand-driven, as it should rightly be, then a determination must be made first and foremost as to what ASEAN's own cyber capacity building priorities are. This in turn hinges on the question of what is ASEAN's agenda in cyberspace. Despite the variances in capacity and capabilities within the region, we know from numerous official statements that ASEAN aspires to be a connected, innovative, inclusive, integrated, and resilient community with a capital C. One that can leverage on the economic promises of the digital world for at least 360 million of its internet users. These are broad ideals, but as I see it, ASEAN's top priorities can be boiled down to 4 C's. Cybercrime is the first C. Content is the second C, including influence campaigns by state and non-state actors. Critical information infrastructure being the third C, which together with connectivity, the fourth C, will increasingly become more of a concern due to government commitment to the fourth industrial revolution in many Southeast Asian countries, as well as transboundary mega infrastructure projects. These projects involve not just the private sector, but also ASEAN dialogue partners that may not always see eye to eye. Many ASEAN statements express hope and excitement outlining connectivity projects throughout the region, but I wonder where the discussions on the security underpinnings of these initiatives are. How will the 5G choices of private telcos in different ASEAN countries impact cooperation with various ASEAN partners, for example? What kinds of norms and rules will govern these collaborations in practice? How will international law apply in practice if a country decides that its forward defense in cyberspace extends to servers located in Southeast Asia? And this brings me to my third and final point, the importance of diversity and capacity building in the process of cyber norms development. With its focus on the economic levers of technology, as well as its market size, the ASEAN region is a prime area for geotechnological contestation. This will add another layer to the accentuating great power rivalry that ASEAN member countries are now already being confronted with. It is therefore imperative that ASEAN countries be able to independently decide their own positions on how international law should apply in cyberspace. Many of our domestic legal systems are a legacy of our colonial heritage. And as younger nations, we tend to accept fundamental concepts as a given when they are taught to us in universities or even through ongoing capacity building initiatives. But if, for example, even the US and the UK with the same Anglo-American legal tradition can take different positions on the issue of whether sovereignty is a rule or a principle, then ASEAN member states must take a critical view on how a concept like that should be unpacked within our own historical and legal context, but with a view to a dynamic future. International law, after all, is an interplay of rules, policies, politics, and let's face it, power. The UN cyber norms processes allow ASEAN countries a peek into how these will all play out in the near future. But rules are already now being shaped by state practice, notably the practice of much more powerful states. Capacity building on norms and international law is a great start, but there must be a diversity of opinions and practices reflected. An exchange of perspectives with other regions, as well as a reflection of developing practices and lived realities, particularly from and in the global south, should therefore be promoted more broadly for the ASEAN region. I'll stop here. Thank you, and I look forward to a good discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Elena. That was really a great set of remarks and so appropriate for our time and for the importance of self-determination in these matters and the complications of that in cyberspace, where boundaries are not clear at all. I loved your 4 C's, and then of course the 5th C with a capital C, community. So thank you so much for that. Alrighty, well, Elena was a commissioner on the Global Commission for Stability of Cyberspace, and she is now followed by another commissioner, Chris Painter, who is the president of the GFCE Foundation. Chris?
Thank you, Bruce, and it's great to be here with all of you. I'm in DC, so it's early in the morning, and it's still really good to interact with all of you. And I've been doing cyber for quite a few years, so I'd like to really build on what the other panelists have said. And I would say first, I agree with what all they have said, but make a couple general observations and then really focus on global capacity building and the GFC in particular. First, I think it's clear that countries around the world are racing to create digital economies and digital infrastructure. That's been going on for some time. But second, I think cybersecurity has often been the poor stepsister or poor stepson, or however you like to put it, that it hasn't gotten the attention at a high policy level that it deserves. Now that's changing, to be sure. And David talked about bringing the ASEAN ministers together, which was done very effectively. And there's been other initiatives around the world like that. But at a very high political level, it still has not been mainstreamed as a key issue of national security, of foreign policy, and of economic security. I think people grasp the economic digital transformation issues to some extent, but they still are struggling with the cybersecurity issues. And it's important to reach those decision makers, both in government and in industry, and frankly, in NGOs and civil society as well. The next observation I would make is that to some extent, COVID has changed that. COVID is, as David and others have mentioned, is largely a bad thing, but it's had some interesting things that we've learned from it. One is, I think, countries around the world, including countries who didn't think they were that dependent on these technologies, now understand they are really dependent on these technologies. And when these technologies are attacked or vulnerable, that means that essentially communication and business can't go forward. So that puts a heightened, I think a much heightened priority on these systems and on protecting these systems. So that reverses my first comment, that I think countries are now saying we need to have better cybersecurity. We need to think about both the institutional protections, the partnerships we have with industry and other stakeholders, and the policies we have. The other observation I'd say is countries around the world, and particularly countries in the ASEAN region, are no exception, have different levels of maturity on this. Some are very mature. Singapore's had its cyber strategy. It's been a leader in this for a few years now. Other countries are right at the beginning stage of this, and that's natural. But we need to bring every country up to at least a minimum standard where they have the right protections in place, the right institutions in place. And frankly, to build on what many of my colleagues have talked about the international discussions in the UN and other places, countries need to have an understanding of what those discussions are. Those discussions only can be useful and richer if countries, not just the big countries, but every country can go to those discussions and understand what the diplomatic aspects are, what the national security aspects are, what do norms really mean, how do you create accountability in cyberspace. And it's interesting watching and being part of some of these open-ended working group meetings as a non-government participant, that many countries have raised capacity building as a core issue. It's, you might think it's a low-hanging fruit, but it's not that low-hanging. It's not that easy to do. But many countries have raised it. It's really striking how many countries have talked about what they really need is the ability to combat these threats. What they really need are the policies to do it. What they really need is the ability to engage in these kinds of diplomacy. So then, turning to, how I look at capacity building, as I mentioned, there's both policies and institutional and technical aspects to this. On the policy level, having a national strategy in place is a key foundational element. I think capacity building overall is foundational to all the other things that all the other speakers talked about here. But having a national strategy is that organizing document, that national statement that this is a priority for that country, how the country organizes. And critically, I think these national strategies are not just government documents. They should be built with other stakeholders, including the private sector, as we go through and do that. And many countries have done that. As I mentioned, several countries in the region are either have or are working on those, and there's more to be done there. Institution building, like having national certs, is really important. Having cyber diplomats or people who can work on these issues in the UN and other areas is really important. Awareness is important. Cybercrime is important. And that leads me to my discussion, and I'll be relatively brief so we can have some comments from the audience, of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise that several of the folks on this call have mentioned. And that was created, another Dutch initiative. It seems like the Dutch have many, many initiatives. They're all good. And created in 2011. It is now over 130 members and partners, including many, many countries from all over the world, including from this region. Singapore is a member. Partners, including civil society, academia, industry. We have a number of industry players, large and small industry players, Palo Alto Networks, Microsoft, Symantec, among others. You know, just a range of different players. So we have that full range of everything from countries and governments to civil society, NGOs, and academia, and businesses. And its core mission is to help coordinate on a global level cybersecurity capacity building, recognizing that the resources we have for this, unfortunately, are not as great as they should be. So we need to do a real effort to coordinate this globally, bring the various stakeholders together from governments and these other stakeholder communities, both the people who need help, the countries who need help, and the people who can provide that help, and put those people together. And some of the major initiatives of the GFC include creating a portal that has a number of best practices from around the world on a number of these different issues, starting a research agenda, a global research agenda that's looking at where there are gaps and how we can fill them. And then most importantly, this, what I call matchmaker function, putting together countries who need help with those that could provide the help. We've done meetings around the world. There's been some regional meetings. We had a meeting in Singapore a couple of years ago. There was one in Africa this last year. We organize around 5 key elements. One is strategy and policy, which includes national strategies, but also includes norms and CBMs and diplomacy, which was talked about by Elena and others. We have one on incident response. We have a working group on cybercrime. We have a working group on awareness and education and training. And we have one on standards. And we have volunteers who work in each of those groups. And I say to the people who are listening on this call, we welcome other people to be involved, other governments to be involved, other institutions to be involved. It's a growing enterprise. It's grown significantly over the last 5 years. And I think it's done a lot of good work in helping countries. And we really need to build on that to really answer this need, this global need, but also a regional need. And we want to work with all of you to do that. The last thing I guess I'd say is that, you know, as we look at this issue going forward, all of these are going to be critical issues. How do we implement the norms is going to be critical. How do we, you know, how do we make sure countries have the capability? And I think David mentioned this is not, in part, this is self-interest. If every country has the capability to deal with these issues, we can help each other and work together. We can collectively respond to the threats that we see in cyberspace. We can make cyberspace more secure and safe for everyone, and that helps all the countries really create the kind of digital economies and societies that we need. So with that, I will stop. I will point you to our relatively new website, thegfc.org, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Chris, and please do check it out. It's a resource, and as Elena points out, you know, if you want to, it's like going to school, right? You get out of it what you put into it. So this is the opportunity for that kind of participation. Okay, all right. Well, Shashi, it's all yours. The floor is yours to make such reflections as have come to you during our conversation today.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, friends. It's really enriching and very textured discussions, and sort of difficult because my job is to be a reporter, a summarizer, and to overlay, I think, some perspectives from RSI Singapore. So I'd like to thank everyone, in particular those who have chimed in from countries where really you should be asleep. It's 2 o'clock in Singapore now, after lunch. This is also my nap time, by the way. So in some ways we are on the same page. I liked a number of points raised throughout the discussion. Let me pick out a few of them. One is how cybersecurity has become just that little bit much more difficult. It wasn't really phrased in this way by speakers, but a number of speakers, including David Koh, have pointed to the increase in opportunistic attacks, espionage, IP theft in the wake of COVID. And you set this self in contradistinction with various norm-setting efforts which are going on around the world. So from one point of view, this is completely unacceptable behavior, of course. But from another point of view, which is that of the aggressor or the malicious actor, this is to supplement open source intelligence, to supplement other fields, to give them a clear edge in this very fraught and intense period. And what nation really will want to give up this edge? For example, look at allegations, and I must stress these are allegations considering one APT linked allegedly to an ASEAN country, which at an early stage of the game was involved in cyber snooping to find out what really was the extent of the outbreak. So to paraphrase something which a historian wrote a very, very long time ago, those strong in cyber will continue to do what they will. Does this undermine the OEWG and GG discussions and other regional-based dialogues? I think not. But one point I would make, which I like and which Carmen picked up on, but Timor has also made this point in an earlier discussion, is that we tend to speak to the like-minded. At what point do we start speaking in an active and engaged way to the non-like-minded? And I think that's very, very important. Now, please don't get me wrong here. Capacity building, norms efforts, and so on will have to continue, certainly at the level of technical cooperation, cert-to-cert cooperation, NGO civil society. They will continue to feed into this, not least of course, work done by the GFCE and before the GCSC. But however these norms debate developed, notwithstanding excellent work done by thought leaders, including the Netherlands and others, notwithstanding good work done by ASEAN nations, you are going to have a multiplicity of differing views. And I wonder whether, you understand I'm trying to be a little bit contrarian here, wonder whether we need to start preparing for a world where the norms processes we are talking about today don't quite have the desired outcomes. In support of this, I'm not saying he's saying this, not by any means, but in support of this, look at what David Koh and others have made of what ASEAN wants versus what the UN high-level, some would say highfalutin processes are talking about. Arguably, there's a kind of a disconnect here. So, and I think no further than to point you to various laws, initiatives, which have been rolled out by ASEAN nations. Singapore has obviously a cyber master plan, a cyber bill, but look at the Vietnam cybersecurity law, look at the Thai cybersecurity law, look at their emphasis, some would argue quite broad brush, on anti-state activity, which have been criticized by some nations and some observers. Some of these bills have general clauses pertaining to authorities' right to seize data and equipment, protecting not just the pipes of the internet, to use an analogy we're all familiar with, but protecting what goes on inside and demanding the right to look at what goes on inside. And I think really this is unlikely to change. When it comes to the Singapore point of view, I think we're sometimes an outlier. We have a cyber agency, we understand what's going on in the GG, OEWG processes, we're active participants, and other ASEAN nations either are or will seek to be fair. But you look at the ASEAN representation at the various forums, ARF, SICW, and you look at the levels of representation from which agencies, cyber might be a Prime Minister's Office, PMO issue, might be a defense issue, might be a Intel or telco issue, might be a security issue. By and large, I think this speaks to their concepts of what we would call information sovereignty, or their higher level thinking in terms of how cyber should be protected, how infra should be protected. So I would say almost bread and butter issues, but I think the more accurate characterization is really the brick and mortar issues, which they are really concerned about. And I think our friend in his last comment, our friend from Indonesia, has hit the nail on the head. These issues in terms of infrastructure and the digital economy and just the building blocks of the digital ecosystem are actually fundamentally where they place their priorities. And if you were to ask, you haven't asked, but if you were to ask what are the other priorities, well, look at fake news, which is a core cyber issue to them. And of course, you can say, well, look at Singapore. Well, I would say for Singapore, we have a fake news bill. There's an acronym for it, POFMA. We separate this out. Some would say artificially, some would say sensibly from our cyber bill. But other countries, I pointed out a couple of them, do not. So in some respects, and again, I'm trying to be a little bit, maybe too argumentative for my own good, Singapore is in some respects an outlier. I don't have that much time, but I want to talk to not Singapore concerns, because I can't pretend to speak to what are the official Singapore concerns, but what concerns us from time to time in RSIS. And again, riffing off some of what I've just heard over the last hour. The overall cyber landscape, and I think Carmen has pointed to this, is one of cyber insecurity combined with a growing sense of urgency. And why do I say this? Look at what is the view evinced by some big cyber powers, where their concept of deterrence has actually evolved over the past few years. This is something we're watching quite closely in RSIS. This idea of continuously and persistently engaging and contesting cyber attacks, not least to reset adversary expectations about the commitment to defend cyberspace. There's a huge literature about this. We all know about this. But these types of forward defensive actions can have a whole host of consequences and ramifications. And Elena has hinted at this. It can unsettle certainly your adversaries, but it can unsettle those who are your friends. It puts them on the back foot, depending on the nature in which you defend your own CII. And I wonder whether if this becomes the unspoken rule of the road in order to defend yourself, whether there will be further diminutions or further deteriorations of trust all around. And I think this is something that has to be discussed. I think it has to be discussed during the ongoing OEWG GGE talks. I'm not for a moment prejudging the eventual outcomes or the agreement or lack thereof of these two very important processes, but I do wonder whether these two processes, we have to accept that the timelines and the timelines with which they seek to achieve success may have to be quite protracted. If you look at UNCLOS, Law of the Sea, and this is an analogy which has been made by others, this was decades in the making. And I'd like to put forward the suggestion, and I hope some of us are around to see it, where we're at the beginning of a process which will take us a long time. So, and if you accept that argument, I wonder whether it might be worthwhile going a step further to suggest that the sets of cyber issues we are at the end of this process discussing may well look fundamentally or radically different from what we are currently discussing. What we're discussing now seems very worthwhile. It seems the right set of issues to discuss. But look at the news coming out of the United States within the last 24 hours, the announcement by the State Department on clean cyber or clean telco. I mean, there have been a number of iterations of this. And you look at the moves against Chinese apps, TikTok, and so on and so forth. And you may well argue, all of us here, wait, that's not a cyber issue. It may be an adjunct or adjacent issue. I would argue, and I'm mentioning this because TikTok user data is partly located in Singapore, that if this sets of issues enlarges where it reaches the point where the United States mainstreams this idea of clean cyber, in my view, this will be unfortunate, not least because it has unfortunate connotations, but it may well stretch out and have ramifications to all those who are asked fundamentally, and this is beginning to happen, to take sides. We do, by the way, in Singapore, tell people we are not part of China. Some people, for the most part, do get that, for the most part. So just to wrap up, it's usually the Singapore point of view to wrap up and give a sort of a call to action, yeah? And I think it would be fitting if RSIs try to do this, given that I've been maybe a bit depressing in my previous few minutes. This is not a government or a sense or RSI's perspective. Norms must continue, please do not mistake me. Singapore has a ringside and informed perspective on this, but I wonder whether we should batten down the hatches because there are other denominators less talked about. I know they concern various agencies here. And what are these other denominators which could be expanded and profitably talked about? Well, how about something we've not really talked about, which is cyber resilience, which is not cyber resilience of systems. There's a technical discussion on that, but of people too. And CSA surveys show that this is a concern in Singapore too. And this is a denominator which we in ASEAN could perhaps take the lead on and indeed expand. do not also forsake other discussion forums like the ARF Intersessional on Cyber, CSCAP, other platforms where we can profitably talk about these issues, and which are indeed critical forums for engaging external partners. All these can and will and must continue. Now that I've, I hope, thrown not too big a spanner into the works, and I hope not depressed all of us too much, but I did want to give an alternative set of perspectives. I'm going to pause here and maybe hand back over to Bruce.
Shashi, that was so good. I mean, I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to be having. And so even if it was not, you know, necessarily conventional wisdom, I think a lot of us, a lot of the participants on this would agree with many things you said. I think it's, you know, we can have another whole workshop on Defend Forward. I think there's a lot of issues to be discussed there, you know, and along with sovereignty and some of the other things that have come up. So it's we have a lot on our plates, and I really appreciate the broader perspective that you brought. Well, we're running a little bit over time, so I just want to end by thanking everyone for attending and for the engaging discussion. Thank you to our co-hosts, our SIS, Shashi and Benjamin. Thank you also to our partners, Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. David, as our kind of official host, do you want to say any parting remarks?
Bruce, thanks so much. I do want to say something, and that is from the perspective of those of us who are in this region. Thank you. Thank Chris for staying up. Thanks Carmen and everyone from the Central European time zone for being with us here early in the morning. I think your perspectives have been very useful. And I hope that and some of it is a call for action from our own region. And I hope that the conversation has also been useful from your perspective, that you have a chance to hear some of the views and thoughts from the region here. But thank you all for bringing the conversation here so that we can socialize people to what's going on and raise a level of awareness. And hopefully this will be the seed for greater cooperation in this area, which definitely needs cooperation. Thanks very much, Bruce.
Thank you, David. And we hope to see you next year in person for the in-person version of this meeting. So we will we'll let everybody know about that when that time comes. All right. Good night. Good morning. Good afternoon. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you so much for coming.